Settling in. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm happy you're here. We're happy you're here. I want to thank you all for joining this session. My name is Rick Stoddard. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'll be moderating this session today. I'm glad to welcome our presenters, Bryn Norton and Jenny Cotton, and they will be presenting Succession Planning from the Middle. Before we get started, I'm going to go over the logistical items that you may already be familiar with, but let's remind ourselves again. This session is being recorded. Captions are available during the session by clicking on the Live CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Thank you to Stephanie, our captioner, for providing those. Please use the Q&A feature for any presentation questions. You can choose to submit a question anonymously. There will be 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the session. Please use the chat for general comments or technical issues. Our wonderful tech moderator today is Nicole Thomas, and Nicole will be moderating the chat for any questions and comments. Nicole will also be adding links throughout the presentation into chat. One of the links will be for the collaborative resource sharing document. If you think you have a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with us at COM's recommended resource document or in the chat. Due to Google Docs limitations, we ask that you close out of the document after you've added the resource. One of the volunteers will drop this information in the chat if it isn't already in there already. The next link is our conference code of conduct. It is the beginning of the conference day, so please take a moment to remind yourself about the code of conduct for our conference. And now I will turn everything over to our presenters and let them have at it.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to our session called Succession Planning from the Middle. As Rick mentioned, I am Bryn Norton. I'm the head of resource sharing and reserves here at the University of Maryland, College Park.
And I'm Jenny Cotton, and I'm the course reserves coordinator at the University of Maryland, College Park.
All right, so just a note, you've already heard this, but reminder that this session will be recorded. We wanted to share our land acknowledgement statement that the libraries, at the UMD libraries, excuse me, we believe it's important to create a dialogue to honor those who have been historically and systemically disenfranchised. We acknowledge, my Zoom is in the air problem. We acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are in the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere. We are on indigenous land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. We pay respects to the Piscataway elders and ancestors. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. As a call to action, if you do want to learn more about the Piscataway Conoy people, we do have a resource guide, and when the slides get posted, you can also read more about it there. And now we'll move on to the presentation.
Okay, so I'm just going to take a moment here and outline the way we've set this presentation up. I'm going to talk about what happened with the Streaming Media Reserves program at the UMD libraries as a case study. Bryn is going to talk some about succession planning, specifically administrative succession planning from the middle and also technical succession planning. And then we're going to talk some about what we've learned and hopefully tie it all together. We've also got time for you all to ask any questions and hopefully have a bit of a dialogue at the end. And we've got a couple of polls thrown in for good measure.
So I am going to shift us to our first poll. We just wanted to get a sense of who you all are. So if you can go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen, 4364 6800, then that would be great, just to give us a sense of whether you're more at an administrative level, a middle manager like we are, lower level first line manager, or also if you don't have any supervisory role, which is also totally fine. And I think you'll still get some good takeaways from this presentation of things that you can do, even if you're not supervising anyone at this time. So we'll just give it a minute or two to have the results filter in here. All right, and thank you folks for adding the link to the chat too. So it looks like we have a pretty good spread. We've got some at the top, we've got a big chunk in the middle. I feel like so many of us are in the middle. And then we've got a few more frontline managers and people with no supervisory role. So that gives us a good spread and a good idea about where folks are. And hopefully you'll get some good takeaways from this session. Just to give you a little bit of overview about the UMD libraries in general. We are University of Maryland, College Park. We are located in College Park, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. We have over 40,000 students in 102 undergrad majors, 115 master's programs, and 84 doctoral programs. So we've got a wide spread of users. And then finally, we do have 8 library branches on campus. The course reserve operation as a whole is located in McKeldin, which is the largest library on campus. And Jenny is going to tell you a little bit more about how we're set up for course reserves, but just so you know that there are 8 locations on campus. And I'll hand it over to Jenny to talk about us.
I will also note that there are hard copy course reserves at 6 of the 8 branches. And those are operated largely independently. However, all of the electronic reserves are operated out of McKeldin. The course reserves unit, we're half of the resource sharing and reserves unit. We have 3.5 full-time equivalent staff. We serve about 300 classes per semester. And when we have both the regular McKeldin hard copies and also our textbook reserve program that the libraries operates. And when we're talking about the electronic reserves, we have both the text-based, like scans, PDFs, links, that kind of thing, and also the streaming media reserves. However, streaming media didn't used to be part of the service. It used to be separate. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. I'm sorry, allergies. So the resource sharing and reserves unit is an integrated team of the course reserves and interlibrary loan staff. We each have an area of specialization, which we have kind of deeper knowledge about and are responsible for. But we also have a lot of shared general knowledge, which we use, among other things, for on-call hours, which is the period Monday through Friday when somebody can call in or come into the library services desk in McKeldin, and like at any point during those hours, they should be able to talk to somebody from RSR and answer, or excuse me, sorry, get answers to basic questions. Where is my ILL? How do I set up course reserves? That kind of thing. We also have a lot of cross-training and backups worked out, which is very useful for us in covering not just when folks may be absent, but also during like high volume request periods. So we can, shift the work around a little bit and help each other out as we need to. And as part of that, we also have extensive documentation in Confluence, which if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of a wiki system. And we use that to keep documentations, Scout is familiar with it, to keep documentation for all of our procedures and all of that. So it's someplace that's easy for everybody to refer to. We use it when we're training new staff, but we also use it for our own reference. If you're doing something that maybe you haven't done in a few weeks or a few months, there are tests that I do like once a semester, and it's great to look it up. And we do update it frequently, so we want to make sure it's always kept current. So next slide, please. And just to give you all a quick visual image, this is kind of our organization chart. As I said, we have 8.5 full-time equivalent members in RSR. 4 of them are in course reserves. Sorry, we have 9.5. Oh yeah, 8.5. Sorry, math today. 3.5 in course reserves. Our hard copy lead is also split with the billing unit. 4 in ILL, and then we have Bren, who's the head. And this is our org chart now. However, it wasn't always this way. So next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the saga of streaming media reserves, and apologies because it is a bit of a saga, but we think it illustrates really well why we think succession planning is so important. So prior to the summer of 2019, Library Media Services, or LMS, operated as something of an island within the libraries. They were largely separate from other libraries units. Streaming Media Reserves was initially part of LMS, and it was separate from the rest of course reserves. And we really didn't interact much at all. However, I think it's probably worth noting that our users didn't necessarily view it as a separate service. As we found out from a 2019 survey that we did, people clearly didn't differentiate the two services. So Library Media Services handled both the hard copy and streaming media reserves for the media collection. Overall, LMS operated very differently than RSR, including their approach to customer service and their workflows. In particular, things at LMS were very much structured around a single expert model, where there was one primary person who ran a service and they were the only one who really knew how it worked. And if you wanted to ask a question, you had to talk to them, or if you wanted something done, they were the one who had to do it. They also had irregular hours. As I mentioned, like we have on-call hours and they didn't have anything like that, but they might answer emails at any time. So if you sent an email on Saturday night, you might get a response then, which is not something that we encourage people to do. So next slide, please. So in the summer of 2019, the university decided that they wanted to use the space LMS was occupying for other purposes, and the libraries had about 6 weeks to plan to move everything out of there. So LMS as a unit was dissolved. The media librarian who was in charge of LMS retired and was not replaced. The media collection was moved into the basement of McKeldin, and the services and staff that have been part of LMS were distributed across the libraries. As part of that, streaming media reserves moved into the course reserves unit. Next slide, please. So in the initial stage, we operated things largely the same as they have been before. Streaming media was in a new location and a new unit, but it pretty much ran things the same way. We had one person who knew how it worked and he transferred over, but it was mostly the same for the users. We did want to make changes, but we hadn't had a chance to plan in advance. So we were kind of adapting on the fly. However, in late fall of 2019, the longtime SMR staff member who had really been the one who ran the service left the libraries. This person did put in advance notice, so we had a few weeks to plan. But as I mentioned, one of the differences between the way LMS operated and the way we did was that there was not really any documentation. So we had to do very quick training and creating our own documentation before like the one person who really knew how this worked left the university. So we were able to capture some of the basic nuts and bolts of how it worked, but we didn't have as much of the deeper knowledge of the procedures, and we lost a lot of institutional knowledge at that point. So on the plus side, it did give us the opportunity to integrate the streaming media service a lot more rapidly, because there was no one invested in how things used to work, at least no one on the staff side. Some of our users are still coming around. But on the minus side, we had to integrate a lot more quickly because the folks who already worked in course reserves now had to take on this new service on top of everything we were already doing. So, however, by early 2020, we were able to revise the copyright policies for streaming media to align them better with our policies for the rest of course reserves. And we were working on integrating the request process in with the system. We use Aries for course reserves, and we were moving the streaming media requesting in there so that we could have everything in the same place and make things simpler for us and also hopefully for our users. And we had put in a request to hire a new streaming media reserve staff person. Next slide. And then, of course, we all know what happened in early 2020. So the pandemic hit. The libraries initially shifted to everyone working entirely remotely, followed by a fairly long period where a few people worked in person and most people worked remotely, and eventually back to our current status, which is where, at least for our department, most of us are in person most of the time. So as a result of all of that, we basically had to redesign all of our workflows for RSR repeatedly. And though that was challenging for all of the services that we provide, I think streaming media was an area where it really felt like the most like we were having to start from scratch repeatedly. That's particularly the case because there was this lack of existing documentation and a lack of cross-training, and that made it much harder to shift tasks around the way we could for the rest of RSR because nobody really knew how things work. Oh, sorry, I will answer this question. I see now. When I'm talking about streaming media, it does include online services, at least for us. It does include online services like Canopy, but we also have a service where we will take items from the library's physical collections and capture and encode them for streaming for courses. So kind of both. So the other major change that this brought about was a university-wide hiring freeze, which meant that we've kind of been limping the service along amongst people who already had other full-time jobs. We've finally got a new person hired to fill this position. She starts next month. Oh, wait, we're not quite in May. She starts in June. We're very excited about it. But it really has been a challenge to maintain the kind of stability that we strive for with our services, with this one in particular, especially because of the lack of prior succession planning. Next slide. So just to kind of sum up a little bit why we wished for succession planning. We're talking about our experiences with streaming media reserves today because we think this is a really good example of why the sort of succession planning that we're advocating for is so important. We face significant issues with single expert limitations and a lack of documentation for this service. And what we took away from all of this, and what we hope that you'll take away from this presentation, is a focus on how can we avoid this in the future. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Bren, who's going to talk about succession planning and what folks can do from the middle or from any position.
Thanks, Jenny. Like Jenny said, that's really now you've heard our big motivation of why it is important to succession plan. And we'll share some of what we did and some of what I found in the literature when reviewing information for this. The first question I'd say is, why should you succession plan? If you haven't had an experience with us, you may be looking for sort of an overall reason why it might be important. And one of the big things is that library employees are a graying profession. I've provided a chart and a graph, one from ALA and one from ARL about retirements. I think we may have all seen retirements even slow down a little bit as people have stayed working longer for their own personal economic reasons. But what I have not yet seen a chart on, which I'm really interested in, is what might be happening with the Great Resignation in libraries, and whether or not that's affecting things. If longer term or even shorter term employees are leaving the profession, what are we losing as they leave? And is there a way to capture that information to make sure all that institutional knowledge does not get completely lost? So what is succession planning? In reviewing the literature, as we mentioned in the outline, there really are two different types of succession planning that's kind of written out there about succession planning in libraries. The first is administrative succession planning, and the second is technical succession planning, which we'll get to after this section. But I really liked this definition of administrative succession planning that I found, which is the right people in the right place at the right time for the right job. And this really relates a lot in my mind to how businesses operate, right? They identify that successor and they make sure that they have everything they need in order to move forward with that type of succession plan. This can be, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but challenging from the middle. This type of succession planning is usually a top-down approach, whether from a university or college or institution down, to make sure that you're identifying those people. I also think it's really important to say that they have, that they're there for the right job, because it's a focus on the individual in making sure that they have the skills needed to do the job that is becoming open, and, and that they could move into it in that way. So just to talk about a few overviewy advantages and challenges of administrative succession planning and whether or not it's right for libraries. I think at the end of the day, you have to decide whether or not it's right for your library. It's hard to take a general view that one is good for libraries and one isn't, or we shouldn't be doing this or should be doing this. I think there's a lot of unique circumstances that have to be involved in evaluating these different types of succession planning. So from the literature and from my own experience, these are some of the advantages and challenges that I've seen. An advantage is that institutional knowledge can be leveraged. If you have a succession plan where you are preparing somebody to move up into a supervisory or leadership position, they're going to start that job on day one with a lot of knowledge that somebody who is external to your organization isn't going to have. They may already have those relationships that they've built with stakeholders, whether internal to the library or external to the library, that they can build upon even further in a leadership role. They may have already even identified some paths and projects forward. So that can be a great thing. The second part of why I think this is really great is that if you're doing administrative succession planning, it really shows that there is support and development for employees to advance within an organization. I know that this is a really big factor in many cases when it comes to retention. Who among us has been wanting that support or development, or do we have access to those types of things so that we can move forward, not only in our own experiences, but in a career path moving upwards. And this also doesn't mean that everybody wants to be on a career path that moves upwards. I think that's an important thing to note. Some people want support and development to just get better at their job. So I think that this is one of the advantages overall, because it allows a supervisor or manager to focus on that support and development, whether it's applied to an individual or to a group. There are some challenges also if you're doing this. If you're identifying a person and saying, this is the person who's going to move into this position when I retire or I leave, or when so-and-so retires or so-and-so leaves, those employees that you might be investing a lot of support and development in, they might leave, right? And so that might be a crappy thing for your institution, but it's not necessarily bad for the profession of librarianship or in staff positions as a whole, right? Because you have invested in somebody and helped given them that support and advancement and development so that they could move on and move elsewhere. So that's probably the librarian and me, where we're like all working together, and somebody may succeed somewhere else, but not necessarily at their own institution. I also think this is important to note because, and we'll talk about this from the middle as well, but they may not, their career path may not align with the timeline that you have in place for succession planning. And that's a definite risk that cannot necessarily be controlled, especially with the state of the world and how things are changing constantly. I also think a challenge for administrative succession planning is that it can lead to a stagnant culture. If you're only getting these voices from inside your organization, you don't get that bump from somebody who's coming from an external organization who's tried a bunch of things somewhere else and bringing that knowledge and information or potentially culture change into your institution. So again, good and bad. It could help you start the job ahead of the schedule, or it could mean that you're going to get somebody who's already maybe disillusioned by how things are running and feel like they can't make a change. Again, it also depends on the people involved. So a few challenges from the middle are budget and hiring practices at your library. If you're a middle manager, you most likely have no control over the budget process at your library. You may be advocating up and building those budgets, but you don't necessarily have control over it. And the same goes for hiring practices. A lot of us have requirements and things that we have to follow when it comes to hiring. So again, I think it's important not to make those promises when you're talking about succession planning that you can't keep, because that can just lead to terrible staff morale any way you look at it. So that kind of relates to the level of control or influence you might have in the middle. You may not have a lot of control, but you may have the ability to influence decisions. You may have more control when I talk about top down versus middle down. You may have more control over your particular unit or department than you would over any positions above you. Depending on your hiring practices and how your structure is built, you may have more control over people who you supervise or your supervisees supervise than being able to set an overall agenda. So all these things can make it a little bit harder to do administrative type succession planning. It's more about advocating and helping people develop than it is about making a promise that you'll be able to promote them. What can you do? So here are things that I've come up with that you can do. One is focus on professional development. Again, I have already talked about this a little bit, but if you are helping everybody develop in the ways that they want to by offering that support across the board, you can make sure that they're preparing themselves for whatever career they want next. And then that's really an individualized focus, which with each individual employee to see what their career plans are and what's going to help them get to that next step. And again, some people might just be happy where they are and want to grow their skills in place. It's not a requirement that everybody has to be on a very stringent career path where they're moving up through the ranks and gaining more leadership. The other one that I would say you definitely can do from the middle, again, it's going to depend on what your institution this is something that I have done as a middle manager at other institutions. It's identifying those potential limits to promotion. So one of the main things that I found at one institution is we had a specialist level and a supervisor level. In order to get that supervisory position, you had to have 1 year of experience supervising people. This was a very hard line. In this place too, it was a unionized environment. So some of the lines for requirements were very, very hard and could not be, adjusted or interpreted in different ways. The problem was that anybody working at that specialist level could basically never get that year of supervisory experience, right? So the structure of my unit at that time was such that there was no way for somebody to move from a specialist to a supervisor to perhaps a head unless they left, got experience supervising somewhere else, came back, and were able to show that on their resume. And I think we all know that that is not likely to happen in many instances. So you can evaluate job descriptions and locate these blocks and see what you can do about them. In my instance, I was able to create a specialist 2 position that involved oversight of student employees and oversight of the budget of their wages, which allowed not everybody to have a chance to advance, but did at least create one potential pathway for somebody who would be interested in moving up to a supervisory place, that there actually is a way, because you wouldn't have a requirement for supervisory to move into this position, and that would meet the requirements to move to the next. I also think it's really important to note that if you're looking at job descriptions, you do want to make sure that supervisees are not working outside of the scope of their position. This is something that I feel very strongly about, that if responsibilities are changing, then that person needs to be reclassed and compensated in a way that is equivalent with the responsibilities that they have as their job duties. So it's kind of trying to figure out too, what is within the scope of their job that will help prepare them for the next level. Maybe it's working on or even leading cross-functional teams, right? But you may not be able to assign that person to actually supervise students or other employees without raising their level. I think it's really also an option for people to move into interim roles, right? And hopefully with that, you can also provide a stipend or a temporary raise that would allow them to work in an interim capacity and be compensated at that level. That's just something that I personally feel very strongly about. Then the last thing that I would suggest you can do is identify competencies and make sure you're building that scaffold for future skills, right? So you can look at your existing job descriptions, but you can also set all of those aside and say, okay, for these positions, what are the core competencies that I actually need somebody to do for them? And is there growth potential, whether it is through promotion or through a change in position? How can I build these skills in to make sure that people who want to progress to more higher levels of responsibility have the chance to do so? And then you can take that information and look back at your job descriptions or work on getting new ones. Okay, now a shift to technical succession planning. If you were going to ask me which one I think is easier to do from the middle, it would be technical succession planning. In technical SPM, the ultimate goal is to isolate, distill, transmit the right information to people at the right time to ensure continuity of operations and provide foundation for future improvements. So while administrative succession planning was very focused on the individual, technical succession planning is much more focused on this information piece, right? It's making sure that that right information is there. And this really rung true to me when thinking about our experience with streaming media. We definitely did not have the right information. We were able to have operations continue, but it was extremely challenging for all the staff involved and all the patrons trying to use the service, right? So making sure you have these pieces in place so that you can also ensure continuity of operations. Some advantages and challenges of this type of succession planning. One of the main advantages is something that everybody's got their own name for it, but let's call it lottery proofing. If you have a single expert that everybody has to run their information through, or who is the go-to person, if that person won the lottery and quit tomorrow, what would you do? Could you maintain that continuity of operations? In some cases, in our streaming media case, if that person had given us 1 day's notice, it would have been extremely challenging. We most likely would have had to pause the service and start from scratch in many ways. But if there was good documentation provided about it, and that person moved on with very short notice, then we would have still been able to maintain the service and make sure that everything could continue in the right way. Moving away from the single expert bottleneck. As Jenny mentioned, we really did have our service set up with a single expert. If that person was unavailable, if that person was on leave, nobody could answer the questions. Nobody knew how it worked. They may not have logins to the various software portals. They may not be able to see what requests are coming in. Right, think about it as email sitting in a personal email box versus email sitting in a shared inbox where everybody can see it. I think that's a good way to think about it. And we definitely had a major single expert bottleneck here. As Jenny mentioned, we really try hard not to do that in the resource sharing and reserves unit. We do a lot of cross training, and that's one of the other advantages. We make sure that people are cross trained on duties so that they can fill in, they can refer to that documentation and refresh their memories, but they've had enough experience with our various software systems. In our unit, it's very focused on software and managing volumes of requests and things like that. But I think this also applies to other areas, right? Like even think about just scheduling something. If only one person can schedule, you have to wait for that scheduler to come so that you can get everything even on the calendar or in place. So we have found in our experience with RSR that cross-training is really important. It also gives some expansion of skills to the people who are cross-trained, right? They learn how to do parts of another job in a support environment. So this is something that we do make sure is in people's job descriptions, not only as other duties as assigned, but as like a named portion thing that they are cross-trained on. It expands their skill set and can help expand their future career paths as well, because they're getting exposed to something that they might not normally get, and they're providing that backup capacity. Challenges to technical succession planning, right? It can be very difficult to work with long-term employees when you start talking about documentation and single expert bottlenecks. Sometimes asking them to document their work can kind of be a threatening experience for employees. I know I've been met in some cases like with a response that's something along the lines of, oh, well, you want me to write down how I do everything in my job so you can just fire me and replace me with somebody who will get paid less. And it's like, no, that's not what we're doing here. That's not our goal. I've also just had some experiences of people taking a lot of ownership over the various services that they might be responsible for, right? So the person who we had in charge of streaming media had essentially built up the system, and they had a lot of ownership over the tasks. Not only were they the single expert, but they sort of kept it that way by isolating the service and not sharing the information and knowledge. So it's difficult. And sometimes you just have to name that problem and address it with folks. Again, it's hard to give sort of a general advice piece to that because again, it's going to very much depend on your individual and what they're thinking. But I think it's important for managers and middle managers in particular to know that people might be threatened by this conversation and you might get reactions that you're not necessarily expecting. I really take to heart that Simon Sinek's message of start with why. And so explaining the why behind it and why you're doing this can help move you down the right path to making sure that you're getting the information you need in a way that can ensure your continuity of operations. I think the second part of this in terms of a challenge is really getting buy-in. As a middle manager, you may have the ability to just direct your unit and say, hey, this is our new project. So you have to get buy-in from those individuals who you want to write the documentation. But depending on what you want, say like, hey, as I saw in the chat, some people here, they never heard of Confluence before. And there's many other products out there that do the same thing. But you may actually need some money behind the technological parts of this to make sure that you can support what you need. And so you also will need to be able to explain to people above you in the supervisory chain why this is important to advocate for those type of funds. Few specific challenges from the middle. I was just talking about this. The technology phase of it can be challenging. If you have to purchase something and can't find a free product, or if you're under budget constraints. Lateral buy-in is also important. So in the resource sharing and reserves unit, we have a resource sharing coordinator and our reserves coordinator, which is Jenny here today. But in order to cross-train across both of those functions, they really have to both be invested in that. And they both have to be ready, willing, and able to have the people they supervise participate in that. Now, that not only goes for a unit like ours, where everybody's at least under the same overall umbrella, but for example, we also do things like back up our service desk, our library services desk here. And so if we're thinking about cross-training that may go outside the scope of the unit, we want to make sure that the supervisors in other units also have good buy-in to the process and don't have expectations that are completely different than ours, for example. All right, the next three are all about documentation, because documentation. Keeping it consistent is very challenging, but also very important. We try really hard to make sure our documentation is consistent so that if you're reading one section and you move to another section, you're getting the same type of information in the same way. We actually have a style guide for our Confluence instance that's just for resource sharing and reserves, so that if we're talking about things like queues or email messages, that everybody can refer back to it, and every queue is going to be bold, for example, right? So that it's easy to pick out when things are moving through a series of processes. Establishing a culture of documentation, again, this is going to be hard with those long-term employees, but sometimes this is also hard with new employees because they don't necessarily see the purpose of it. So trying to encourage that culture so that everybody understands why we're keeping documentation, why we need to keep it up to date, but also being flexible. Like, you don't need to make an edit every 5 minutes, right? Maybe you do at the beginning, but when you're doing the documentation, you shouldn't have to be very, very tied to it. Also understanding with flexibility that things are going to happen that aren't documented, and that's okay. That's totally okay. It's just the way that life goes. The last piece is keeping that content current. Like I said, you want to factor in flexibility, but also making sure you're doing regular reviews. I've dealt with this some places, like when a software interface changes and you use a lot of screenshots, you suddenly almost have to like throw away all of the work that you did in making such a lovely visual guide to work somebody through a piece of software. One of the approaches we use is to not lean heavily on screenshots and focus more on process and using things like our style guide to identify cues or text in different ways. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time making some beautiful documentation that just did not last very long. That can be frustrating as an employee being asked to make documentation. You feel like you've done a lot of work and now it's not worth it. But it is important to keep that information up to date. So having like a regular review schedule for it is also really important. And maybe if you're like us and you have tons and tons of pages of documentation, you don't need to review everything once a year, but maybe you go section by section and you can break it up so that you have like a full review of what's happening, in addition to the stuff that always comes up that makes stuff weird as part of your process. So a few things that you can do from the middle: creating and maintaining documentation, cross-training employees, and just advocating for employees. So we talked a lot about documentation. I feel like I can't harp on it enough. In terms of technical succession planning, if you don't have that information to pass on, then you are, it's not going to go well, right? Having some sort of documentation about what's happening is a really key part of technical succession planning. Cross-training employees, again, for example, in my unit, resource sharing and reserves, I have the ability to work with my supervisors to make sure that their staff are cross-trained across the board, right? And then from there, both their supervisors, Jenny, our resource sharing coordinator, and I can work with other folks in other units to make sure that all those things are balanced. Again, give somebody the ability to grow their skills. They might find something that they actually like better than what they're doing, and that can be adjusted and supported and offered more development in that area. And then finally, I feel like I'm always going to say this, is you can advocate for employees. You can advocate for them to be cross-trained. You can advocate for them to get that professional development and support. In this case, it might be advocating for them to take on those leadership roles so that they can create documentation of, let's say, a specific process. So they might not be able to supervise or lead people, but in many cases, at least in my realm of the world, leading a process or having the primary responsibility for a process is something that fits well within job descriptions. Offers that chance for advancement and development, but also make sure that that person is able to save and share their institutional knowledge in a variety of ways. Okay, I've got another quiz for you all. If somebody wants to pop it in on the link in, that would be great. Now that we've talked a little bit about this, I would love to know if your institutions have a succession planning, whether that's administrative, technical, no, they don't have any, or you don't know. And I'm thinking about like not only just you, but like big picture, right? Like, does your institution encourage this type of work? And I'm realizing I should have put like a both administrative and technical, but I did not. So here we are. So you're being forced to choose. We're getting a lot of no's. I should have mentioned, as people are filling that into in the last bit, I think it's a key thing where if you're not supervising anybody, but worrying about your own position, you definitely can document your own work. Like, you should absolutely have the power and ability to do that. You can leave that behind for somebody else. You can use it as a training tool. It's something that you can take on. And if you are interested in cross training, I do think it's also something that you could approach with a supervisor and say like, hey, I really want to learn more about X, Y, and Z. There can be options for that. If you're seeing things as just an employee that you're like, I see a really big gap here, or every time so-and-so's out, everything in this service has to stop. I think there's a really good way to be able to share that information, especially depending on the unit you work in, the group you work in. Sometimes I think actually employees doing the work have the best view of where those single expert bottlenecks are, because they may be the person trying to answer a question when they don't have all the information, or trying to do a process that there's not enough documentation for, so that it makes their day really crappy when somebody's on leave for a week or something like that. And we want everybody always to be able to take their leave and walk away and not have to worry about what's going on. All right, we just have a few lessons learned. I think Jenny and I can just like tag team these a little bit. And then we will get to questions where we also would be happy to hear about your succession planning successes and failures. I think the main thing is decide if succession planning is right for your institution, and decide what type is right for your institution. As a middle manager, you may have better luck with technical succession planning than administrative. Doesn't mean you couldn't advocate up, but you have to kind of think about your own unique circumstances, because I really do think that that's an important part of succession planning, is tailoring it to your own institution. I think I gave you a pretty good example of why it's important to evaluate job descriptions, whether you're doing it through an annual review process or outside of that. Making sure that cross-training pieces are in there if you want, that there aren't blocks to a career path or promotion, and that there's availability for people to increase responsibilities, but also be compensated if they're working outside the scope of their job description.
Sorry, like I said, it's spring, allergies are terrible. And, you know, we also highly recommend evaluating your services for those single expert bottlenecks. And those, I think, can be a real problem, not just when somebody leaves or even when somebody's out, but if you have somebody who is particularly busy right now and they are the only person who can answer this question, then that's a problem for everyone. And I know it was frustrating for us and also for our users, like, you know, when we would have people come in and ask questions about streaming media after it was theoretically part of our unit, but there was only one person who could answer the questions, and that person wasn't available right now. And, you know, we had to say, well, just email this person and they should get back to you soon. That wasn't a good experience for anyone, I don't think. So also create and maintain documentation. Again, documentation, it's so important. And maintaining it is really a key part of that. It can't be a once and done kind of thing. And again, cross-training is really valuable for us. And it's really helpful in covering not just if somebody leaves, but also, so that you can go on vacation. And I know that's something that's come up in the chat, is like, that's a thing that can help people understand what the value in documentation and cross-training is like, if you go to the beach for a week, do you want to come back to a nightmare of nobody knew what to do, so they just kind of winged it, and now there's a terrible mess for you to clean up? Or would you rather, people can kind of maintain things for you, and then you come back to, okay, I have a couple of questions I need to answer, but it's not a nightmare. So all of that stuff in our experience, makes things better for everyone, for all of us and for our users. And sometimes it just takes a little bit to explain that to people and help them understand that it's not intended to be a threat. And honestly, I will also say cross-training sometimes helps people understand how deep somebody else's level of expertise is. Because you can say, oh, well, I can do a few of these things and I have kind of a broad understanding of how it works. But, if I have a deeper question about this, if I need the deep knowledge, then this person really knows it inside and out. And they are the person who has that expertise. So
here's some resources that we cited. There's so much out there on succession planning. It can be challenging to find stuff specifically about libraries, though. This is in the resources document as well. And then really our last slide is to chat with you all. I think, Jenny, that you already started this first question that I see about working with these long-term employees. And I think that, to Jenny's point, it's very hard. Like, you have to explain to them why. You have to share those reasons, whether it's the vacation coverage or whatever's going on, right? And as a manager, you don't want to be like, hey, well, think about when you're going to retire one day, because you don't want to open that can of worms. Like, that's another whole mess. But I really think it can be very individually tailored. And I think a lot of that is making sure you're approaching it with that perspective, that this is somebody who's going to be threatened, and let's talk about why you're threatened and what that means. And now let's think about what some of the benefits are overall to this, and make sure that we're addressing them along the way. I do think it's one of the hardest things, though. It can be.
And kind of piggybacking off of that, I saw there was another question about, do you have problems with perceived favoritism if you're cultivating some folks for moving into new positions, but not others? And I mean, I think that's definitely something that you want to be aware of, but also I think what we're advocating for, at least I am, I think Brent too, is looking at things in terms of individuals. And so, there are some people, like with cross-training, that'll be like, great, I would love to have somebody who can back me up when I'm super busy. And some people are going to be like, are you trying to get rid of me? Why do you want someone else to do my job? And so you have to look at it in terms of the individual that you're dealing with and what their priorities are and what they want. So, it's fine if you have folks who want to move up, that's great. You can support them in that. And if you have folks who really love their job and want to keep doing this job forever, then, support them in learning new ways to make it better. Support them in things that keep the job interesting for them. It doesn't have to be like a one size fits all. And hopefully, if you're doing that, then it won't come across as, this person gets all the training and support, because everybody's getting the training and support. They just may be getting different. Like, it may be different in line with their own separate goals.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it, Jenny. So I won't add any more. I'll just say yes. And I'll go to the next one. Have you experienced the MLIS as a barrier to succession for employees who would otherwise be qualified for a position? Absolutely. I think y'all have figured out that we work in access services, and man, access services can be rough. You could work somewhere for 20 years and be super awesome at a job, and then you're never going to get promoted because you don't have that degree on paper. I feel like that's like a whole other presentation, and that's definitely one of my research interests that I'm looking into. At the place I worked, there was also an education requirement that potentially could have been a block, but I saw it also as an opportunity because that particular place had a tuition remission policy going on, which meant that if the education was like a real block, then they would be able to see that and be able to take advantage of things like tuition remission. I realize that's absolutely not the case everywhere, but that's at least what I've relied on in past circumstances. In other instances, there's no way to get around that lovely piece of paper that says MLIS on it.
I think though, potentially even in cases where like you don't have like tuition remission to offer, and we're fortunate that UMD does have an iSchool, so that was kind of one of our selling points when we were hiring for this streaming media position recently. But even so, like you can, as much as it's within your power anyway, like talk to your employee and say, like, if you're interested in working on a program, you know, not here, but somewhere else, like I'm happy to support that. And I know I got my MLS from UMD, and like we had to do a big capstone project, and I used something that I was working on as part of my job and was able to kind of tie those together and, you know, support that kind of thing too. So, oh, I'm seeing horrifying comments about we have documentation in 14 different places, and we keep discovering people have paper documentation hidden in their desk from years before. And
It's a project, right? Like documentation.
Uh-huh.
And I see another question about that, whether our documentation is all written at this time. We have talked a little bit about videos or having other ways to do it, but haven't gotten that far yet. I think our first step was the extensive written documentation, but it is in some places, especially, I mean, I've walked in somewhere with no documentation. My very first librarian job, hired at a library school. I had staff positions before. I was told, hey, in addition to all of your instruction and the reference desk, you're also in charge of interlibrary loan. Guess what? The position's been vacant for 18 months. So the two people who were doing it for you were splitting it in half. And also, they don't really know what they're doing.
So Bryn, I'm going to have to ask you to end it right
Sure.
there. We're almost at time with 1 minute left. And this has been a great presentation. Jenny and Bryn, thank you for sharing this information with everybody here. There are some other questions. It has resonated with people. I think the single expert bottleneck is something that a lot of people experience. And learning from that can be very helpful for folks to unstick that sticky situation. And so there will be people, if you can look for the evaluation, that survey should come out at some point, I believe, to folks. I want to thank Jenny and Bryn for sharing their expertise and experiences. This was a great session, and I wish everybody a good day and that enjoy the rest of the conference.